Honey, when you say, honey, when you say, anywhere.
Hi everyone, I am Nicole and welcome back to my channel, Nic With Love. So today I want to expand upon a previous video I did, the last video I did about the energetics around the election 2024 and just kind of reading into the energy. And I spoke about wanting to come back and dive a little deeper and have a conversation around speaking to Black women. I am going to talk about the trauma response, the triggering trauma response that so many Black women felt. And I think it's the perfect time to talk about this. You know, I think it happened because of the energetics around the year that we're in and how it's the path to purpose moving into the year of the 9 years. So I wanted to get this in to provide my take on it and also just hold the space to have this conversation that I think a lot of people are not having. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. If you're interested in going a little deeper, then keep watching. So the election was a level of intensity, and one of the things that came out of the results the next day, there was this chart that came out, and the chart was talking about, you know, the people that voted and how they voted. And instantly it was, you saw like Black women were the ones who were the majority of the demographic that voted for the Democratic candidate Harris. I knew that that was gonna happen because just the narrative that led up to showing up in the voting booth to vote or to cast their vote in that way. I just had a problem with it. And I've been trying to unpack why. Why am I having this intense level of disappointment, of outrage, of just annoyance with these talking points, right? I feel that they were tapping into shame. I think they were tapping into guilt. I feel they were tapping into so many emotions that it triggered something within Black women on a DNA level. Let's talk about triggers here. So, triggers. It was a very triggering response. And when you think of triggers, and I'm talking about like the psychological definition around triggers. I'm not talking about this whole way of using trigger to identify that you're sad or what have you. I'm talking about triggers from the standpoint of attached to a trauma response and a deep rooted trauma response and experience. Triggers happen because there's an emotional event that has occurred, and that emotional event has had an impact emotionally and physically, and for some people spiritually. You know, it has impacted on all the levels of our body, our psyche. And so, you know, triggers can happen from those events, and so depending on what's going on at the time, we can have a memory attachment that links to whether it's a sound, whether it's the weather. I know for me, I have a trigger response when it's raining and I'm in the car, because I always remember the time that I spinned out, as my car spinned out when it was wet. I was literally just turning to go onto the interstate and my car spinned out. And I still have that response. Sometimes I can feel it in my body, and you know, I just calm myself, like, it's okay, you're fine. No, I have my practices, and I have a level of awareness. I say that to provide a sense of feedback when it comes to triggers and their impact. How does this relate to the election, right? I have notes, by the way, because I want to make sure that I cover all the points here. So, how it relates to the election, I want to talk about the intensity of triggers and why a lot of Black women were triggered. And I'm going to go into greater depth in how I see it, my perspective, and just from an energetic approach. And honestly, just from a human, me being a Black woman who has grown up with other Black women, and I carry the stories of their experiences with me on a cellular level, the ones that have been told to me and the ones that have been birthed through me through my mother and such on a DNA level. Woke up the next morning and so many Black women were over it. They were triggered. They were triggered, and they were feeling it intensely. So why triggers are experienced so intensely is because it's a trauma related trigger. This trauma related trigger, it stems from the brain's survival mechanisms. And so when the sensory memory is tied to that traumatic event, the brain, it starts to prioritize these associations as warnings. It's the brain's response of like fight or flight, trying to keep you safe. It's like, oh my goodness, this is remind me of that experience. Let's go into the state of making sure that we can avoid it. It's protective in nature. Our brain is trying to keep us alive, but sometimes it can misfire, and it leads to responses that are really disproportionate to the situation. The intensity of trauma related triggers is rooted in the brain's survival mechanism. So this sensory association is formed during traumatic events, and it's encoded by the amygdala. And the amygdala is the brain's emotional center. Okay, remember that. The brain's emotional center is what is responsible for that fight or flight that you may be experiencing through this trigger response that I feel is what has happened for a lot of Black women. Again, this mechanism is really designed to protect us, and sometimes it can lead to overactive responses, reactivating the emotional intensity of past traumas, even in seemingly unrelated situations. And this is the part I want to lean into, the unrelated situations. I had so many conversations. I was listening to other people speak about their experience around the election, and they were like, I don't know why I'm so upset or why I'm feeling this way. Or some women just saying, I am very upset and disappointed, and these are why. I think there was some traumatic experience that we have had generationally speaking. Now I'm talking about generational trauma here. When you break down triggers, there's different categories of triggers, and the one that I'm speaking of specifically in terms of today's conversation is the cultural or identity trigger. And it's this response that's related to personal identity, cultural, or societal biases. It's rooted in, societal dynamics, identity challenges, or historical trauma. And so we have this trigger response that is generational trauma that we as Black women are carrying. It goes into the narrative of be a strong Black woman, that narrative. But where did that narrative come from? What's the trauma response? It goes back to slavery. I know we want to avoid the conversation around slavery, but it has had an impact, and it still is having an impact on a DNA level, that things are triggered in us in such a way because it's generational trauma that's being passed on, and it's cultural. It's a cultural trigger, it's a societal trigger, and that is what has been activated in so many women who were just like, what is going on? Why do I feel this way? We're gonna get in a little bit deeper around it, looking at my notes. So I keep looking down. I just want to make sure that I bring the points across because I think it's important to have this conversation, regardless of me being able to like memorize it. We need to have the conversation. So now that I've kind of like set up the like what triggers are and kind of I hopefully made the linking to, oh, it's generational trauma. Let's talk about the historical context and when it comes to generational trauma from the political um standpoint. Black women have historically taken on like leadership roles in the fight for civil rights, social justice, community upliftment. And they and then we've had like really strong political figures like Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hanner, who have really laid the foundation for modern political engagement and activism. And so this activism, it stemmed from the necessity as Black women navigated like this intersecting of oppressions of racism and sexism. So that's the rooting of the activism, the call to act. And so that's in that layer of generational trauma that was activated in so many of us. It was also part of the energetic attunement and talking point, essentially, that the Democratic Party leaned into to activate that trigger within Black women. The level of responsibility is deeply intertwined with generational trauma when it comes to what I'm speaking in context to political responsibility. We have to go back to slavery. Enslaved Black women were often the ones who were forced into caretaker roles, both for their families and also the people who owned them, the oppressors, as they say, but the slave owners, or just even, you didn't even have to be checked by someone who owned you. It could just be any white person. You had this, just even talking about it, like I feel it in my body. I just don't understand why we're trying to avoid talking about this. Like the whole idea that slavery was a choice, the whole idea that slavery has provided, has been purposeful. And I do think that is very true. And I think that's part of another conversation and the frustration that created this race of people who are strong, who are fully capable of figuring things out. But we had no choice. We had no choice. And Black women specifically were the ones who had to take care of things, watching epigenetics and certain things within us turn on, and we have this reactory response to things. And it's just like, do we even have the awareness around like this is what it goes back to that? And so my point here is slavery is an important part of the conversation, and it had an impact about Black women, with Black women. We're being triggered, and we're not even talking about this generational trauma that's being passed down, and it starts from slavery. So it's the importance of having the conversation, of unpacking it, of acknowledging the pain points that so many people that were part of the narrative have had. I think we as Black people, we want to talk about it because it's like we have had such a significant physical, it's the physical abuse part of it that we kind of talk about. It's the physical, it's the emotional, and the mental on top of that. And we're not the only group. It's like Black women, they were forced into taking care of in these caretaking roles. So when you see the strong Black women now and how it plays out now culturally in the society where we live in the United States, Black women are the ones that are responsible for taking care of their family. They're the ones that are, expected to show up and this self-sacrificing. It's this legacy of self-sacrifice that we are perpetuating. And these ideas are reinforced, that the idea that Black women, we as Black women, must sacrifice our well-being for survival or for progress for the collective. It leads to the cycle of where our needs are deprioritized. Our needs are not prioritized. It's like show up. We're still being expected to be the caretaker and taking on the role of caring for the Democratic Party or you know Americans. I don't know. Fill in the blank. I think that is the problem. That's the problem. I thought it was entirely problematic. It's just like, oh, Black women are going to show up. And it's just like, why are they showing up? Why are you expecting them to show up just because this is the Democratic Party? Just because there's a Black woman running for office? I think it just is a slap in the face to say, well, okay, we expect you to show up and do it regardless of your values, or if you really are really aligned with fully or completely with this candidate. And not to say, and I will be honest with myself, I struggled with really feeling inspired to vote for the candidate because I never felt like there was this conversation around policy that made sense to me. And not to say that, the other side was any better. I think they were both one and the same, but they just approached it very differently. And I know people have very strong opinions. This is like why I felt compelled to vote, because it's like I don't want the other party to get in office and just it's just a layered conversation. But it goes back to that activation. When we think about like enslaved, how the impact of slavery has had on everyone, the collective, it played out on the political scale, on the stage rather. It played out in this way. And it's just like, wow, this is really interesting. Really, really interesting. And I think we as Black women specifically, we need to be aware of how we're being used. And I'm going to take it a step further. We all need to be aware of how we're being used, how we're being manipulated, how we're being called to do or be a certain way. Here's the thing: you have every right to choose what makes sense for you and your family. And I just, I just, I just have always been challenged with like, oh, Black women are going to show up and they're going to save the day. And it's just like, why is that our responsibility? It's not our responsibility. It goes back to slavery. We're the caretakers. We're the ones that were pushed into doing this, and we have assumed the role that we're still tapped into today. This legacy of self-sacrifice, it's generationally passed down to us, and we're still carrying it in our body and our DNA on a cellular level. We have this trauma bond, this attachment to slavery, and we have this call to activism, rightfully so, wanting to get to a greater sense of equality. That's all we really want, is equality. So there was a level of emotional disappointment that came from that. Many Black women, they expressed their frustration and exhaustion over like consistently showing up to vote. This call to action is not really what we want, because like we show up and then nothing comes out of it. We don't benefit from it. The other person has benefited from it because they're in office, but it's like, how am I benefiting from it, from my sacrifice, from my family, from myself, from my life, for the future generations moving ahead? And so there's this lack of feeling unacknowledged and underservedness in post-election policies. The policies don't line up, they don't match up, and it's not part of the political discussion. They're not part of the political discussion. It's like, okay, we expect you to show up for the vote, but after that, okay, bye. What are, like, that is a slap in the face. People see it. It's this exploitation of support. They're exploiting Black women for their vote, and particularly the Democratic Party. It's like, oh, we're going to mobilize Black women voters, and it's the challenge that I have, and the challenge that a lot of women are having, is that it's the post election part of it. We show up. What's happening is post election, we're feeling very used and not valued. Our support is not being valued. And I think a lot of women are feeling that. I really do think a lot of Black women are feeling that. What's the path forward to heal this generational trauma? I think we're really being called to look at it. So we just came out of an 8-year. Well, we're still in an 8-year. An 8-year is, you start to really see the structures. We're starting to see the structures in place here, right? And so the structure in place around this election is looking at how we as Black women are being used in this way. Like, we are being used, or we're being activated and reminded, like, okay, it's your job, it's your responsibility to show up and be the caretaker. For a lot of Black women, they're like, we're out. And I'm glad you guys are out, okay? Because I've been out for years. I'm so glad that you guys are out. We have to break this generational trauma because it's not serving us. No, the strong Black woman idea is bullshit, okay? It's bullshit. I'm going to say it again. It's bullshit. Give it back to them. It's not your responsibility to be strong for everybody else. Be strong for yourself. Take care of yourself. Pour into yourself. Do the things that make sense for you in your life with the people that are around you. Make that make sense. I feel like there's this requirement for Black women to show up and always take care of things. And it's like, no, 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 no. It goes back to, we're not responsible for saving people from themselves. People need to step up and they need to learn how to save themselves. That's the only way it's going to work. Everyone builds a level of mastery. Everyone gets to a sense of building their strength and their fortitude, and they show up. They know what they need to do. They know what it needs to take, and we can't do these things on our own. And I'm going to be 100% honest, the political system is not it for me. I think we need to connect back to our communities, and we really need to start focusing on ourselves. We need to be selfish because we need to get a greater sense of ourself and understanding the generational trauma that we're carrying in the stories and the attachments, the identification that we have with those trauma, and justifying or using that as a blueprint for our life. And it's making us sick. It's killing us. It's making us depressed, avoidant, neglectful. And what is it all for? We show up and we vote, and someone gets in office, and we're still here living our life, and we're struggling in silence. That's what breaks my heart, is the struggling in silence. That's the part of the conversation, part of the narrative, where I'm like, is anyone checking to see how they're doing? You have this group of people that showed up, and they were told, like, okay, nope, how can you show your appreciation? And I think there's a lack of appreciation that is not shown consistently to Black women, that is tangible in a lived experience that can allow them to let go of just waiting to figure stuff out, just waiting to figure stuff out, just holding it in your body, because we're the ones that have to take care of everything, and it's at the expense, is at the sacrifice of ourselves, and the self-sacrifice is not our responsibility anymore. I think of my grandmother, my great aunt. Man, I love that woman. She had a level of determination for sure, and they had a lot of challenges growing up, and I understand the challenges that they had, and didn't have the right to vote and fighting for the right to vote and all those things. And I think this fight that we're in, what are we fighting for? And is the fight that we're fighting going to lead us to the point of getting what it is that we want? I think we need to pause and reflect on that. So we're going into a 9 year, and a 9 year is a life review. That's how I call it. And so it's going to be a level of intensity. It's an ending of cycles. And I see the gifting of this just from an energetic standpoint. I saw that this was going to be the results. And now on the other end of it, I'm reading into the energy and I'm feeling into how people, their systems are overwhelmed. They're disappointed. They're sad. And it's for me, it's like, okay, what is the attachment? What's that cord attachment to that emotion? And I see that it is one that was birthed through us. We carry it on a generational level, that it's been triggered within us, and it goes back to generations having that traumatic experience of being the caretaker, pushed in being the caretaker and sacrificing yourself, and it's become the narrative of being a strong black woman, and all of those things that honestly doesn't feel good to be engaging in that way, because it doesn't feel good in our body, it doesn't feel good in our minds, and it just doesn't feel good in our soul. It's so soul draining taking care of other people who are draining our own energy, and they're not doing their own taking care of themselves. People are responsible for themselves, and we have to give people back their stuff. We have to let people save themselves. Just it just is what it is. It's one of the things as a practitioner, I would love to work with more people, and I can't force people to show up and do the work. They have to show up and do the work. Recognize and acknowledge their feelings, and the impact that how they're feeling has influenced their choices that they're making, and what have you. And so I think it's, for me, I'm always constantly reminded that people have to be ready to live their life, and it's not my responsibility to save them. And the biggest thing of all is I can't save them. I am not God. I can't save them. I can provide them with support. I can provide them with guidance. I can provide them with feedback. And, I can do crystal therapy session, and working with chakras, and I can move energy because I understand how energy works. The thing about it is, if they're not tapped into their energy, if they're not aware of proper energy hygiene, if they're not even aware of their energetic hygiene, it's going to go back to how it was. Can't save people from themselves. That's not our responsibility. We can support people. We can provide them a safe space of acknowledging how they're feeling, and empowering them through figuring out what makes sense for them in their life. Because how I may need to do something for myself at this time in this cycle of my life, it may not be something that you can even tap into. And that's okay. You have to find your way, you have to find your path. Can't save people. They have to save themselves, because they have to walk for themselves. You can't carry other people. That is part of the generational trauma that we as Black women experience, is this cultural requirement or reminder of that being our role within society, within our community. And it's making so many of us so sick spiritually. So we just spiritually um diseased. So what's the path from generational trauma of political responsibility here? I think the first thing is to acknowledge and validate the emotional impact. It's really important to have tools that you can do that's not dependent on other people. So, journaling is really, really impactful. Writing out how you feel, or talking out, do a voice note, just talk to yourself. I talk to myself all the time. This whole idea of like talking to yourself means you're crazy. That's not normal. What does normal even mean? Because I have come to realize normal is the abnormal. I don't think there's anything wrong with talking to yourself. It helps you talk through things, and we need to get in better conversation with ourselves so we have a better understanding of how we're feeling emotionally. So create that space for grief, whether it's with yourself one on one, being in conversation with a group of other Black women. But I think it's really important to have a space to express your frustration, your exhaustion, your disappointment, without judgment and dismissal, and really recognizing that these emotions are valid responses to systemic inequalities and generational trauma. Because I saw it activated. I was like, ooh. And it activated in me early on, and I was able to catch it and really did my best to hold the light in the space of like, may this be healed. And I feel like that's part of the gift going into the next year, is really looking at how we show up, and it's about letting go. And one of the other things here is like releasing the narrative of obligation. I think next year will provide an opportunity to release the narrative of obligation, of having to bear the weight of saving the political system or communities alone. And it's really about shifting the narrative. That's going to help to reduce feelings of depression, feelings of guilt, feelings of over responsibility, feelings of, oh, I must save, fill in the blank. I must save everyone. I'm the savior. I have to be strong for my family. I think it's important to create space for your grief. Blueprint, the energetic vibration, the frequency going into a 9 year is going to support you to do the work, because you can't unsee it, because that is where we are on a universal level. Universally speaking, it's a 9 year. It's such a great year to help support in looking at generational trauma and how it's impacting, but it starts with acknowledging how it's impacting. So you feel how you feel. And I think a lot of Black women are avoidant of expressing their feelings, and it's like, I don't have time to feel. And it's like, okay, but you may not give yourself permission to have time to feel, but you're still carrying your feelings. That's the thing about it, is like, the avoidance of feelings doesn't mean the feelings aren't there, that you're not carrying them around, and that they're not seeping through or bleeding out in other ways for your life. They are. They really, really are. Emotions don't work that way. They don't just go away, because everything is energy, and energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's all about, it can change, it can change and morph and what have you. I think it's important to prioritize individually, you know, um, maybe going to therapy, because I sense the generational trauma is like, what is it attached to? It's a layered, it's layered, it's deeply layered. There's so many core, like there's the cord. You look at like a piece of thread, and if it's, you see it start to unravel, there's these tiny little threads that are within that one thin thread, that one thin piece of cord. So there's this unraveling that really can help support Black women at this time, especially given, the generational trauma impact and what have you. And also, I think it's really important because they're going to be going into midterm election. Oh my gosh. So healing is what's called for at this time. We're going into a 9 year of looking at things, and I think provides an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity. The fact that we have gotten to this point collectively as a group of individuals, of strong Black women, we are strong. So lean into your strength, lean into your resolve, lean into your ancestors to support you in the way that they will, to heal, to recover, to restore your soul. This is a much needed conversation for sure. I hope that it's provided some needed clarity, some support and encouragement. If you need any support from me, just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help support you through the acknowledgement, the recognition, through the processing through of how you're feeling and all the emotions. And I want to say, remember this: everything is energy. Reality of everything being energy, it also means that you can move through in such a way that you can adjust your energetic profile. You can. You can do that for yourself. I just wanted to take the time to give that space to Black women. Is so many times we're not allowed the opportunity to breathe and take it all in and to process through it. You are seeking support and guidance in finding your path and your way forward in that. I hope, if you haven't already, you'll subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in a future video. So let me know, does this resonate with you? How are you feeling? It doesn't matter whether you're Black or not. Like, comment down below. I am an all-inclusive community because everyone's perspective matters. It does. Bye. Thanks for watching. Like, there's other ways of doing that. I'm just gonna hold the space for Black women. That's what I'm gonna do. Because a lot of times we as Black women, it's like, what about the other women? It's just like, it's exhausting. How about we take up the space right now and we get focused on? That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna keep my focus on that. So it's at a sacrifice for sure. The generational trauma connection is so, like, I just feel it in my body, and I think we really do need to pause and reflect.